Philadelphia has a pretty decent sized Korean population. Plenty of Korean community there as well. There's been an H Mart there for a long time.
Oh, wow. That's how you know.
That's how you know.
That's
right.
the number one indicator right there.
Yeah.
Welcome to The Worst Asian Podcast, where a couple Asian American millennials give you our shitty opinions on all things Asian. My name is Lingjie. I'm here with my co-host, Ben.
Hello.
How you doing today, Ben?
I am doing very well. It's very hot.
Oh, yes. It's 90 degrees today. And then tomorrow, I think it's becoming like 60 or something.
Damn, that's weird.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Actually, our guest today might have some inside scoop on the weather. I'm sure he knows a couple of meteorologist friends himself.
You're right.
Coming onto the podcast today, self-proclaimed horrible cook, maybe America's biggest, hottest thirst trap journalist. If you don't know this man, you're probably watching too much Netflix. Let's welcome onto the show New York's very own CeFaan Kim.
Woo! How you guys doing?
Doing good. Thanks for coming on, man.
I'm good. I don't give the weather though. That's one part of this news business. You can be wrong half the time and still have a job. And weather is not my thing. So don't blame me when the weather's bad.
I always joke about in baseball, if you strike out 7 times out of 10, you could still be in the Hall of Fame.
Speaking of baseball, as a fellow New Yorker, CeFaan, we need to know. Okay? Mets or Yankees?
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Off the record between just you and me.
Yeah, sure.
I was born and raised in Philly, so that makes me neither.
Oh, God.
I've just lost the entire audience here, but no one's perfect. So, but I will say this. I'm not a Yankees fan. Sorry.
Oh.
It just, it's like the evil empire thing. That would be like rooting for the Pats. And as much as like the Mets are division rivals with the Phillies, I called Queens home for a decade and covered Queens even longer than that. So I have a soft spot for Queens, and I do love Citi Field. So it's weird that I would root on like a division rival.
Yeah.
But if I had to choose, it would be the Mets.
Okay.
There you
Because
go.
I was going to say, you might not have a job to go back to when you go back to work tomorrow. But I think you've saved it. They'll probably at least give you like a 2-week grace period now.
Yeah, I mean, I get half the city at least, right?
Maybe less than half the city, but sure.
What's that? I'm not gonna lie. I prefer going to a Mets game over a Yankees game, though. There's just something more fun about it. When you go to Yankees, it just feels so serious.
Yeah.
Ben is a Yankees fan.
Yeah.
We just need to add that as a
I am a diehard
disclaimer.
Yankees
So
fan.
it's okay
Yeah.
for you to say that.
I mean, it's a better stadium. It's also in Flushing. I mean, the food's better in and outside the stadium. So, I mean, come on, you can't go wrong there.
Exactly. There you go.
We'll take what we can get. Because I was telling Ben before, when we were doing some research on you, I said he was born and raised in Philadelphia. So there's a very likely chance that he is a Phillies fan.
Yeah.
But for the rest of this episode, we're just going to put that on the down low. We're not going to talk about that again.
Yeah.
We're going to pretend like we didn't hear that.
Thank God this is only between us, right?
Yeah, between
just
us.
between
Yeah,
us.
yeah.
Off the record.
Off the record.
Just between us, yeah. No one will know.
And by the way, we are not journalists, so we don't know what off the record actually means. So if it still gets played, then that's because we don't know what we're doing.
Yes,
Right,
exactly.
it was misunderstood.
It was misunderstood. One lighthearted thing I want to talk about. I came upon this YouTube video of yourself. I want to say this very kindly. You were attempting to cook in quotation marks, or you're attempting to cook something.
Attempting is the operative word here. I was actually attempting to bake pumpkin pie because I love pumpkin pie, but it turns out I'm better at eating than baking. So, I mean, I'll stick to the eating part. I tried, man. A for effort,
I guess you're not the one that's cooking most of the meals in the household, though.
No, and you know what? To be honest, I didn't want to do that, but the station wanted to. It was Thanksgiving and Christmas, and people eat that up. I mean, no pun intended.
Yeah.
And they asked each of us to cook or bake something. I knew it was going to be a disaster, but hey, man, I mean, at least it was good comedy.
Yeah, it was good
Provided
comedy.
some
Good
laughs.
content.
Yeah.
Sometimes when things fail, it's actually better content.
Yeah.
You do have more eyeballs on you over the course of the past couple of years or so. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that we are here in New York City, ground zero to a lot of what's been happening. How are you dealing with that increased fame?
Well, let me sort of unpack that question into two, right? The first part, I think that's debatable, right? We're ground zero. I think perceptively that's the case, but the one thing is, first, I would say, like, when you compare, for instance, what's happening to New York and in San Francisco versus like Los Angeles, I do think a lot of that is because LA is a car culture. And what I mean by that is a lot of these incidents and assaults are coming out of like these random interactions that only really happen when you're on the street walking in condensed cities, right? So I always make this argument that it's not that there's a lack of Asian racism or bias in other cities. It's just that in cities like New York, where we are forced to interact with each other, packed onto trains or on sidewalks, this is what sort of manifests, right? I think secondarily, I do think a large part of why you're seeing this concentration of incidents in New York is because I'm here, to be quite honest. I'm reporting it. And kudos to my colleague, Dion Lim at the ABC in San Francisco, who's doing her part. But I don't think that every market has local newsrooms that have journalists in these newsrooms that are necessarily plugged in and sourced, that are connected on the ground to the community, have the passion, quite frankly, to be dogged about this, and have been around long enough to sort of understand what's happening in a greater context. So, I mean, sort of like answer that first part. The second part of it, the fame, and I've been asked that a few times over the past year or 2 years, and it sort of surprises me because I don't look at it that way. I don't necessarily look at this as, yes, there's been heightened attention on my work these past year or so, but it's not that I, was invisible before. So this is sort of comes to the territory, right? I would say that for me, that it's made me a lot more busy. I have been trying to tell stories for 20 years doing this job of all of the things that impact the AAPI community, right? As a journalist, our primary goal, our primary mission in life is to be a voice for the voiceless and the unheard. It just so happens that the AAPI community is one of the most unheard and invisible and underrepresented. And so whether it be, being vulnerable to violence or hunger or lack of access to education or other kinds of, services, I've been trying to tell those stories for 20 years. And frankly, we know this, we're not culturally trained to wear our struggles and pain on our sleeve.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's hard to tell stories, our stories, if we don't speak out. And that has been something that's shifted dramatically over the past year and a half or so, because suddenly there's a moment when people in the API community understand the importance of speaking out and being public. So suddenly last year I was inundated with all of these stories to tell. And that's the plus side, is that the floodgates opened and there was no lack of access to victims or just stories to tell. But on the other hand, one of the downsides is one of the hardest things I've had to do is tell a victim, I believe you, your story matters, what happened to you matters, but we don't have the time to get it on air because there was so much of that. Just because you don't see what goes on in the air doesn't mean that there's dozens of more victims that I've spoken to embedded behind the scenes, right? Like that's just a fraction of what you're seeing. So just have an idea, if you saw publicly how busy I was, the veracity and the speed, the pace of this coverage, just imagine what you weren't seeing on the air. And to that end, I think the one thing that has changed is I have kind of made certain boundaries because I have to prioritize. I only have so much time in my life, right? Personal, professional, balancing all of it. So social media has become sort of a one-way street for me. I put the stuff out because that's where the eyeballs are, but I do a good job, frankly, of just not really taking too much in because it can be a rabbit hole, right? It kind of it's never ending,
right?
And everyone has an opinion. And frankly, like opinions are not that's not the space I delve in, right? I operate in a space called facts, right? And so people are going to have opinions. I can't necessarily control that. I can put the facts out. You do what you will with it. If I go down this rabbit hole of reading every commentary, it's never going to end. I'm not going to have time to sleep and breathe. So in that sense, I think I have, and again, forgive me to anyone on social media who's trying to reach out to me about that. It's not personal. I just had to create some boundaries over the past year. I think that's the more direct way to answer your question. To just cut it off, right? Because I need to have a life too. So
exactly. I think as a fellow father myself, sometimes you need to find that disconnect between work, professional, and personal life. It's been good to see you disconnect from all that. I guess that kind of leads into the part that I want to talk about. A lot of us probably don't know what exactly your backstory is. Aside from being a Phillies fan, where did you grow up?
Yes, I was born and raised in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is, it's a rough town, right? I always say it's a little bit like Boston, maybe worse in some ways, where people will tell you what they feel, right? And I grew up in Northeast Philly, where most of my childhood friends growing up were Irish, Italian, or both. Most of their fathers were cops or firefighters, very blue collar.
Right.
And I was reminded every day that I was different, right? And this is an odd thing to say, but some of my best friends said some of the most like racially offensive things to me growing up every day.
Oh, wow.
And I'm also Korean American. So, as we Korean Americans know, our parents have never taught us to walk away from a fight. So I got into...
CeFaan, yes. Don't worry, New York's the same thing.
It's the same thing, I know. So I got into quite a few brawls. I would say like every other day I got my butt whooped.
Yeah. There's
certainly some value in getting your butt kicked on a constant basis. But that also causes, some real trauma that carries with you, But for me, it sparked, my fire because I knew from a very young age that I was different. And in order to be heard and be equal, we had to fight for that. And so I knew from a very young age, I would say middle school, early high school, that I want to be a journalist. I want to be a broadcast journalist. This was a day, I'm older than people think. I'm 41 now. So, this was like the late 80s, early 90s when television news was a little more, relevant than it is today. And I was fortunate enough to have parents who were not typical Korean parents, right? They were not like you be a lawyer, doctor, or the typical.
Oh, wow. That's good.
Right.
Yeah. My father was actually involved civically quite a bit in Philadelphia. He was actually the first Asian American commissioner of the city of Philadelphia under then Mayor Good.
Oh, wow.
Wilson Good. And he went into nonprofit work. He still does nonprofit work, grassroots, nonprofit, on the ground, that kind of work. It really is like personal to me. My mother was a nurse for like 40 years. So I say that both of them were in like civic duty work. And they instilled in me from a very young age, like the importance of community. They actually encouraged me to take this route because they understood why I wanted to do it, right? Again, it wasn't for fame or notoriety. It was the fact that, and I was always sort of an old soul, like even at a young age, I sort of knew that like kids would call me racial slurs and, pulling their eyes back and mocking the accent and all of that. But I knew that society wasn't going to allow us to define a dictator on terms, right? At that time, now things are changing now, but Hollywood didn't have roles for Asian men that didn't fit like their narrative.
Yeah, very stereotypical.
Yeah, it was very limited, right? But in news, I thought, look, here's a profession where I would speak without an accent. I'd be in your living rooms telling you what's important in your day. And if you can trust me to tell you what's important in your day, even if it's subconsciously that you accepted me as a part of your society, then maybe you go to school the next day and you don't pound on the next Asian kid because suddenly we're not the other.
Huh. That's amazing. Speaking of like where you're saying from your Philly and you're talking about the Korean side, how much of the Korean side were you exposed to there? Like the community, I guess, to start from there? How was it like?
Philadelphia has a pretty decent sized Korean population. Plenty of Korean community there as well. There's been an H Mart there for a long time.
Oh, wow. That's how you know.
That's how you know,
That's
right?
the number one indicator right there.
Yeah, it's been there for a while. Although the coffee's better here in LA. No one in Philly doesn't hear this, right?
Jeez.
Turf wars.
Yeah, I grew up. I mean, look, I'm conversational in Korean. My parents spoke Korean to me growing up. I went to an all boys boarding high school where a lot of the international students were from Korea, so I got to practice my Korean there.
Oh, damn.
I always joked that like I can't deliver a newscast in Korean, but I can conduct an interview in Korean enough, like to be conversational. Ask a person like, are you okay? What happened? How can I help? Things like that. So my Korean's probably better than average for an American-born Korean. It's certainly not fluent, but
okay. As
you can see through my work, I'm pretty much in touch with it.
Yeah, CeFaan, just for the record, since we know what that means now, or off the record, since we know now, my Korean is absolutely trash. My dad loves to shit on me about it all the time. He'll be like, Jesus Christ.
And your parents barely speak any English to you. So
I know.
It's amazing how your Korean turned out to be this bad.
I know. I think their English got so much better because of that. I would say so.
It's crazy. Like every Korean person that we have on this podcast.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. They are always reminded about how they don't think that their Korean is good enough. And Ben is always very kindly telling them,
don't worry. I will destroy that standard. Going back to what you're saying though about, I heard this one person tell me, there's one thing to be able to speak English. There's another thing to sound American.
You mean in terms of connecting with the audience better?
Right, exactly.
Is one necessarily better than the other though?
I don't want to say there's anything necessarily better, but my in Korean, like my dongsangs, younger siblings, they would say that it's like you sound American. Like I could speak English, but I can't sound American. So I just wonder, like CeFaan, with you, like when I see you, it's amazing seeing like, oh, that's us being represented in the best way possible.
Well, I mean, look, I appreciate that. That is like honestly the highest compliment I can receive because again, I kind of mentioned to you, even in grade school, I knew representation matters before it was even a thing.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
And I'm very mindful that the way that the outside world perceives us, whether we like it or not, they're looking at me or whoever else as representation of you, right? So I try to do my best when I'm out there. So thank you, I appreciate that.
Did you find yourselves with any barriers when you pursued journalism here in New York City? Anything that specifically you can recall being an Asian American that made things harder?
1,000%. So look, it's always harder to do something when you're different, right?
Yeah.
People are uncomfortable by change and something different. I would even start this story even sooner. I get asked a lot about systemic racism, right? Part of what I've been trying to do in the coverage is show that anti-Asian bias is not it's not a new thing. It did not start in 2020. It's not going to end in 22, right? This is why, if you look at a lot of my storytelling, I make it a point to kind of slip in there. Were you surprised by the bias? And the answer is generally no. And then the follow-up question is, when's the first time you faced it? And the answer is generally very, very young.
Yeah.
So that the point I'm making there is that this has always been a thing. I also try to make the point that it's not coming from a particular subset of people. It's not just, we see a lot of homeless people behind these attacks, mentally ill. It's not just them, right? I spent 2 sleepless nights outing Maura Moynihan, the daughter of the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, after whom the Penn Station is named after, right?
I was just going to say,
Moynihan Penn Station, right? And the reason why I was so diligent and dogged in pursuing that story is because I wanted to show that this is a person who was white, affluent, educated, from a powerful political family, and yet still spewing vile vitriol, right? I've tried to show this come from New Jersey high school. Did a story about how, they wouldn't allow them to discuss Asian hate because they equated this to a political movement like BLM.
Right.
The city of New York sent a letter from a city agency to 2 Vietnamese New Yorkers on the Upper East Side titled, excuse my words here, I'm quoting, Ching Chong, right? So my point is, this is not coming from black, white, brown, it's everywhere, all different socioeconomic backgrounds. And it's been here since we were born, right? So that's my preface to my point here, systemic racism, right? I remember vividly in 4th grade, having the teacher of my class openly mock the sound of my family's names and had the classroom collectively laugh at me, right?
Geez, yeah.
Why do I still remember that in 4th grade? Obviously, it was traumatic, even though I didn't realize that until I was an adult, right? I'm an Army veteran. I've had, in the Army, drill sergeants tell me, go back to China. And I've had to fight, in the Army, we say that, we're not black, white, or brown, or yellow, we're green. Well, then own that, right? Don't be a hypocrite. Don't say that in your mantra,
exactly.
and then come at me like this. That was a fight. And then you fast forward even to get to your point, my professional life, right? I landed at ABC a little bit later than I think some people do. Look, first of all, let's just be clear. Very few people in this business get to that level. But when you do, it's probably a few years sooner.
Okay.
And I think for sure that happened because this is a face that's new and uncomfortable, right? I call this the evolution of racism. My mentor and dear good friend still to this day, Tiwa Chang, was the first Asian American broadcaster. You all know him,
of course,
right?
Yeah.
He's my man, he's my homie, right? And he tells me a story that when before he got on air, he sent his audition tape to a friend who was a news director. And this friend said to him, I can't hire you because when I see an Asian man on TV, my body tenses up and I think about Kung Fu.
Directly, he said this.
Wow.
Directly to his
no
face,
sugarcoating.
Right? No, and so think about just how many levels of that is just offensive.
I know, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Now fast forward to, I want to say 2015 when I was, doing the rounds, getting interviewed by literally every newsroom in New York and some networks. And I have had every single news director I interviewed with, assistant news director, agent I was interviewing with, ask me the same question or the version of the same question. Is English your first language?
Damn.
Wow.
Ask yourself, I don't think they meant it maliciously,
right?
But I think it's baked in, right? Subliminally, for some reason, they don't see this face and this voice as being American. It didn't bother me. The only newsroom that did not ask that question, and I'm not just saying this because they're my employer, was the station that I'm at now. That has been exactly why, I've been so comfortable here because, they've embraced what I'm about, who I am, my work, and what my brand is. That was rare to find. And I'm lucky that the number one newsroom in America was the one newsroom that said, we want you the full package, right? Without any apologies. And so I think to answer your question, whether it was so outward or not, a little bit subtle, there was definitely barriers because of the fact that I look different and I'm not something they're used to seeing.
We've seen your rise in fame here in New York City, but even sometimes we don't really get a chance to stop for a second and just think about exactly how long and how many bumps in the road it took you to get to where you are right now.
Exactly.
Is there anything in particular about your current station, and you don't have to get into the specifics, of course, but is there a culture that's more inclusive? Like, can you pinpoint?
I would say this, to answer that question, WABC Eyewitness News is what we call in the business a legacy newsroom, meaning as a New Yorker, people are just generation after generation. They grow up with watching this newsroom, right?
Yeah.
For that reason, when you're number one and you have that kind of legacy, you have a little more leeway to really kind of do your thing.
Yeah.
And so what I mean by that is that the magic sauce that makes Eyewitness News is that we hire talent for who we are and then allow us to kind of be us, right? So most newsrooms, I would say every newsroom minus ours, a reporter sends in a script, and that script may get edited by 6 different eyeballs. And by the time it gets back to you, you all look and sound the same because it's been sort of edited down to what fits, right, that style.
The narrative.
At Eyewitness News, the formula is sort of like we let the talent write in their own voice, right? And they don't really do a lot to get in the way. And that allows each of us as personalities to really have ownership of our own personality and our own style and our own approach. That all being said, they also trust us with a great degree editorially. And so to answer your question, last year when this all kicked off, and again, I've been doing it for a long time, but when it really started got attention, they never once doubted me or questioned me along the way. It was almost like blank check, carte blanche, like go do your thing. They let me rip, right? I mean, I was a madman on the streets. You guys all saw it. They let me rip, right? And I was just popping off left and right. And I would say that very few other newsrooms would have given me that kind of leash, right? To just really do my thing. And so in that regard, the trust that's there editorially gave me a lot of freedom to pursue this coverage in the way that I wanted to. And it was what a lot of folks don't realize. I had this sort of bigger picture always, right? It was never about like one singular story. I always thought about this as each of these packages, 2 minutes or so long, they were all like sort of mini chapters. And then there were like these several other chapters because I know how people's attention spans work, right? You can only see grandma and grandpa getting their ass whooped so many times before you just get desensitized, right?
Of course, yeah.
Right? You can only have this conversation, circular for a year before it's like, okay, we've talked about this. What's next, right? And so I've always known from the beginning there was going to be several pivot points, and that's why today, I'm going back to what I've always been trying to spotlight in the communities is poverty.
Right.
We have this model minority myth that we're all affluent and doing okay and successful. That's not the case, right? And poverty, whether you are communities that are black, brown, yellow, whatever it is, poverty is the common denominator that makes you vulnerable to violence, to hunger, to all of these issues, right? And so when people ask me, like, what's next? Look, I'm not a legislator. I'm not an activist. Right. I have to operate in my own lane, right? I don't create laws, but what I do is I see what's on the ground and I have to tell those stories, right? And in my humble opinion, we don't get to any solution so long as we are still struggling with poverty, lack of access to education, food, and for that matter, education. That's another thing I think you've seen publicly. I've been really doing, getting people in positions of power accountable, whether it's a mayor one-on-one or the governor one-on-one. I had them commit to supporting Asian American history being taught in public schools, right? This is an important issue, not just for people who are not AAPI, right? Think about like us. You know how many kids I've interviewed that have surprised me that growing up in today's age, I thought, hey, it's not as bad as it was when I grew up in Philly, right?
Right.
But they're still like scarred and traumatized by the bias and the racism they see. What that tells me a lot of is like, they don't know their own place in our society. Right?
That's true.
They're not taught Vincent Chin or all of these other struggles and these historical moments that we had AAPI activists at Malcolm X's side when he was assassinated, right? Like, if we don't know our own story and our own place in this history, how do we feel like we belong?
Exactly.
Right. So this is important, right? Like, I don't think this is a controversial issue, quite frankly, right? This law passed in New Jersey unanimously with bipartisan support for a reason, right? This is a lot of folks when they hear this, they go, how is this not already a thing?
Yeah. It just seems like such a common sense thing.
It is common sense.
If we had grown up and been given the opportunity to learn a little bit more about ourselves, who's to say how much that would have changed our road path going forward?
I totally agree. People don't realize, like, they don't instantly think, oh, you're an American. They don't know that we love rock. I'm a Yankee fan, you're a Met fan.
Right, that you were born in Flushing Hospital right here.
Exactly. I was born and raised here. So it's so important. And you're right, it's not controversial at all.
Can I ask a bit of a side question? And I don't mean to take this the wrong way, but do you ever feel like some newsrooms feel they need to have a quote unquote token Asian, a journalist or anchor?
Let me sort of answer this more broadly. I think, forget about newsrooms. I think every organization has this concept of, right? I don't think there's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, let's flip the question reverse. How would we feel if they didn't feel like they needed to have a token, right? I mean,
That's
like
true.
to have zero, right? So I guess that's progress. I don't know, right? That being said, look, obviously, and again, I'm trying to answer this question more broadly because I do think, being honest here, on the societal hierarchy, the AAPI community isn't necessarily always a priority. And again, a lot of that is self-inflicted harm. We have not, as a community, been vocal about the needs that we have. And so that's part of it, self-inflicted. You know, and look, this is the idealist in me. It's not just about having any token X, Y, and Z, right? Just because you're Asian or Black or Hispanic doesn't mean that, you know, every CEO or every journalist is created the same, right? It doesn't mean that we have the same drive or the same things that we're passionate about. So I think every organization needs to look at representation does matter, but also the proper representation, right? Does it align with like your organization's, brand and mission statement? Are you more than just token?
Yeah.
So I don't know that like it's necessarily a good or bad thing. It's where we are. It would be blind to pretend like this is not a thing. It's a thing, but you can look at it both ways.
Yeah, because I always view that as more of a positive. Wherever we're trying to get to as a whole, it's not going to happen from Monday to Tuesday.
Exactly.
And sometimes in the meantime, we have to take these opportunities and make them into better, bigger opportunities for ourselves as well.
Yeah, I would add this, on the more specific point about newsrooms, the newsroom's goals are always to have a roster that's reflective of the community in which we cover.
Exactly.
Right, because that's the whole point, right? You want to be connected to the community. You want them to feel connected to you.
Yep, exactly.
And I do think that most newsrooms in New York, mine included, do a very good job and consciously try to represent every community in New York. And allowing me to do my thing is more than just being token, right? So if I can give some credit to my employer, they could easily have just hired someone who looks like this and doesn't walk the walk, but that was important to them when they brought me on board. They said that it was important to them that like I was actually someone who's embedded in the community and that they felt that was something that was missing in their coverage for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Being Korean, Asian American, is it hard taking your personal feelings out through your coverage and trying to be objective sometimes?
So first of all, it is my job to be objective, right? It's not something I have to try to do.
Right.
I've been doing this long enough where I can approach every story objectively. It's not difficult. That being said, it doesn't mean that I'm not a human being.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I have personal feelings, right? And so I would argue this. Sure, every human being has a right to their own personal history and biases, right? The problem is when that biases bleed into your work. And I would argue that my work has never crossed that boundary.
Okay.
And sometimes I do face this criticism of that. And I would say this, not every journalist agrees with Trumpism or for that matter, BLM. But we were out there in the streets every day. Our job is to be a messenger.
Yes.
I may not agree with everything that either side has to say, but that's not my job. My job is not to give my opinion. It's pretty freaking simple, actually, right? It's just be a messenger. This is what they feel.
Yeah.
This is what they say, right? It is not my job to be judge and jury, right? It's my job to present.
Yeah.
When it comes to this coverage specifically, some might argue, there's a personal bias. And I would say, look, I'm simply just communicating what the feeling is in the community. If they feel fear, whether it's the Orthodox Jewish community or the AAPI community or the Black community, that is our job to communicate that they feel afraid.
Of course.
It's really not that complicated. And honestly, it's unfortunate that there's a lot of journalism going on these days that makes it seem complicated, but it's actually not. To do this job correctly, it's one of the most simplest, easiest things. Black and white, balls and strikes, facts, that's it.
I like that.
Piggybacking on what you said before about sometimes seeing the same coverage over and over, and specifically what's been happening the past couple of years, as viewers, sometimes you become somewhat desensitized to it, and you're not doing that on a conscious level, I think. So I guess the same question for you, because I assume based on everything you said that you're seeing much more than we are on TV. So do you yourself sometimes become desensitized to all this stuff that you're seeing?
No, and that's a surprising answer because most journalists, as a defense mechanism, I don't blame them. It's a survival mechanism, right? We see a lot of trauma and heartbreak and tragedy.
Yeah.
A lot of journalists, as a defense mechanism, survival mechanism, will kind of close that off because otherwise you take it home and it's it's tough, right?
Yeah.
I would say that for me, and again, this extends far beyond my community and this coverage. In news in general, we interact with victims quite a bit. And it's not just victims on this particular topic, right? And so this is something that I've had to deal with, for the better part of the last 2 decades. And I deliberately do not close that off because I feel like in order to really tell someone's story, I have to feel that pain.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's an awfully personal thing to do. And it does take a toll. I'm not going to deny that.
It must make it harder.
Yeah, I would say that throughout last year and even to this day, like there were random moments suddenly that caught me off guard for no apparent reason. Every few months, I would just become consumed with pain and agony and anguish out of nowhere. It's just that's what trauma is like, that's sort of the weight of this, right? And I never denied it. I always allowed myself to feel. And every so often I just have to release.
It's only healthy that way.
Yeah. And there's no doubt that each and every one of these victims that tell me about their trauma, like it obviously triggers something in my own past. I mean, this is my whole point, right? Like we're human and we've been subjected to this. I can shut it off when I have to get out on TV and I have to, work, but it'll be like those moments in between when I'm sitting at home and there's a moment of quiet and peace and suddenly the rush and it just overcomes, right? And so
right.
I'm not sure if you're comfortable talking about this, but there have been a couple times on air when you yourself have been the victim of either a hate crime or a violent act.
Which time are you talking about?
We're laughing about it, but it's like you lost count.
Yeah, I mean, look, I go back to my other answer, right? None of this is new. And when I'm a journalist, it's actually quite easier to deal with because I'm in that sort of observer mode. And frankly, like there have been times it's happened to me where like it actually fits the story editorially, kind of prove the point. So it's almost like
you've helped your case.
Yeah, you've actually kind of like proven the point that, like this exists and this is out there. It is what it is, man. I mean, like there comes a point where you have to be like, okay, you got to pick your battles, right? Like
there's levels.
I can't like both personally and professionally worry about every single microaggression. Like it's going to happen. It is what it is, right?
Yeah.
And in some ways, to your points, just sort of being visible and publicly out there, my face, I hope does in some small way resolve some of like the issues that microaggressions and things like that we can't really address unless like we really change what people see, what they consume in the media, the imagery of who we are, right?
Right.
So it is what it is, man. What am I going to say about that, right?
You got the tough skin.
To kind of pivot to, I guess, to a more positive side of news coverage, when you're reporting on good news, does that lift you up and balance out all those negative times?
Yeah, sure. I think I mentioned before, we see as much, joy and hope as we do the other stuff, and specifically to coverage on the API community, I've always, again, for 20 years, tried to spotlight and highlight stories of success and struggle that they've overcome, profiled, whether it's like the highest ranking female NYPD officer, or I remember last fall, I profiled Danny Chen, who's the cousin of Private Danny Chen, who took his own life in Afghanistan because of racial taunting. And he went through the FDNY academy and he wants to be a firefighter. The FDNY has, struggles with diversity, and you don't see a lot of AAPI faces in that department, right? I thought it was important not just to sort of highlight this legacy of Danny Chan, but to show that like Asian American New Yorkers can be firefighters too.
Of course.
Yes.
Those are all stories that are important to tell that have hope and inspiration. So yeah, those stories always matter to me for sure. That's what life is, right? Life is a little bit of everything. So
ups and downs.
Yeah.
Exactly. Do you have the worst or like the funniest assignment that you've ever worked on?
I guess a more comical touch.
Yeah.
It's hard to come up with the best and worst when you've done this job for so long. I have met the past 5 presidents. I have, covered 2 terror attacks, survived 2 terror attacks.
Yeah.
So I get asked that question, both questions, the worst and best. And I always struggle with that. I would say the most memorable, funny thing that's happened to me is if y'all recall back when Congressmember Anthony Weiner was running for mayor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we know the
backstory.
Right, the crisis. Yes. Yeah, we saw a lot of Anthony Weiner. What happened. There was obviously protests outside of his office. Let's just call it that. What happened.
Yeah. Oh, yes. That was very awkward.
Yeah.
Listeners can do some light Googling to see what we're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, you can look that up.
You don't have to type a lot.
No, I don't have to write. And so I'm outside his office in Forest Hills. And there's a bunch of protesters, and I'm doing a live shot. And unbeknownst to me, right next to my face, over my shoulder, I didn't realize this because I'm looking at the camera, somebody held up a sign that said, Congress, circumcise the wiener. And it was like right next to my face during this entire live shot.
Yeah.
But I only found out after the fact because friends were texting me like, oh my God, there was this sign next to your face.
Oh, man.
And that clip.
But the cameraman couldn't zoom in a little bit and kind of like crop
it
the
was
sign
right next to my face. There was no headroom or croppable space for this. That man made sure that this made the shot. So
we need to do some deep Googling.
Yeah.
Because I assume it has to be out there on the internet somewhere.
It's out there somewhere.
Yeah, shout out to Forest Hills, man. Queens, yo. I gotta go do this right now.
Oh, God. One lighthearted question just to wrap some of this up. Ben has a Korean name, Byung.
Yep.
We both have been the victim of people mispronouncing our names throughout our entire life. We don't take it personally. So just to give you an example, my name is Lingjie. I've had people throughout the course of my life doing business who they say lingerie. And I know they mean zero harm. They mean absolute zero. I'm like, they're the nicest people.
Right.
Obviously, I correct them and such.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Have you been the victim of a lingerie situation?
That's a pretty high bar. Look, I would say this. My name is unusual, right? So let me start with that.
Yeah.
My parents were atypical. They didn't give me like a Korean name and then like an American name or like something out of the Bible, right? Like Peter or John. What they did was they anglicized my Korean name. So my Korean name was Hwan, which became CeFaan. So Korean, right? So like fighting. So sometimes the Hwa sound is like phonetically, anglicized to the F sound, which is why the F is capitalized because it's Hwan. So he capitalized the F. I know. Why is there a C? Why is there two A's? I don't know, right? It's weird.
Yeah.
So like a lot of Korean folks butcher my name as well. It's not a Korean name either. Right. So Koreans are like, what the heck is that? Right. I get it from all sides. I get it from like Koreans, non-Asians. Like, what the heck is this? Right.
Are you Stefan?
So that's the most common, right?
Really?
I don't know if I know like the worst version of it, but the most common like mistake is Stefan or CeFaan, right? Because that's the way it looks.
Right.
Where it's more like Stefan. It's more like Stefan without the T sound. Yeah. But here's a funny story. So like when I was interning for T.Y. Chang, this is like way back in like the year 2000. I was in college.
Yeah.
And so he had gone through this struggle with his name, where early in his career he went with T.H. Chang instead of T.Y. because American viewers just could not relate to T.Y.
Yeah.
And he would say to me, like, you got a really great TV name. I'm like, what are you talking about? He was, well, like, your last name is so ethnically, undeniably Korean and Asian.
Right.
Your first name sounds and looks black. And I'm like, huh? But think about it, like, LeBron, L-E capital B.
Deshaun, I see where he's coming with that.
Jackson, L-E capital S. LaShawn, L-E capital S, right?
Yeah.
So fast forward 6 years later, I'm covering Queens for New York One. I could walk through Flushing. Nobody knows who I am, right? But in Jamaica, where there's a heavy black population, I had 4 people tell me that they named their kid CeFaan.
Shut up.
Right?
Wow.
Right.
For real?
So T.Y. was onto something there, that there was some relatable thing about
crazy.
My name. And so there you go. Like that's
that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's a cool story. I like
Shout
that.
out to the CeFaan Johnsons out there somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere in Queens, right?
Ranting and raving. This is a segment that we do on every single podcast where us, the host and the guest, just take a minute or so just to quickly rave about something positive in our lives or rant about something crappy in our lives. Very quick, lighthearted way just to end everything. Ben, you want to take this?
It's still like a little thing that keeps going on. We need to stop it. We have all the technology. I hate people that can't park properly, especially when they take up 2 spots.
Yeah.
I just can't stand it to like my bone, and I see it.
You mean like in a parking lot or like
a parking lot? Like I get it if it's like empty, go for it. Take 3. But when it's like, yo, we need to park, we need to do our thing. For the love of God, who is this person?
Yeah.
So that's me. I sound like an old dude right now, but yeah, learn to park, guys.
No bueno.
No bueno.
My rant for this week is it's summer right now, 90 degrees outside. Whenever it's summer, I go into flip-flop season. But this year, I'm starting to take care of my knees now. And I feel like I'm getting old, so I can no longer do flip-flops or sandals or anything like that. I'm still doing. Yeah, I can't do that because it's just bad on my knees right now.
Yo, get out of here.
I mean, we're only in our late 30s, but still, I'm trying to take preventative measures for my knees. So
yo,
so I'm doing like, Yeah, that's why you don't see me in flip-flops now.
Yeah,
it's
I
fine.
don't.
I can't do that.
I thought you were
so-
just like hiding your ugly ass feet or something. I thought that's what it was, man.
No, shout out to all the people who are still lucky enough to be able to comfortably wear flip-flops.
Oh my god.
What about you, CeFaan? You got anything to rant or rave about this week?
In my line of work, we're always like in a news vehicle, like a live truck.
Yeah.
And so like we have to drive everywhere, and so like the traffic situation is really just like mind-boggling these days.
Oh my god.
My rant is this. Isn't it interesting how what we call them professional drivers, the Uber and Lyft and the cabs who drive for a living are the worst drivers?
Yo.
No offense. Like I don't mean to like you know what? I'm gonna try to bring a solution, okay? Like,
Let's hear
I'm not
this.
just trying to like fire shots off at like our hardworking cabbies because
course
they
not.
work hard. But for the love of God, if you have an empty space to pull into, even if it's a hydrant to drop off a passenger,
Yes.
can we please pull into the empty space and not just double park it?
Oh my
Is it
god.
that hard to do?
Oh man.
I say this to my wife all the time when we're driving by, and I know it's an Uber Eats person making a delivery or it's a driver dropping off someone. I'm like, dude, I'm not saying this to them, obviously. I'm saying this to my wife in the car. I'm like, dude, there is literally a giant fire hydrant. You're going to be in the car
Right
for 2 seconds.
there.
Just pull up. What are you worried about?
Put on the hazard.
If you're double parked somewhere in the middle, you technically get a ticket. If you park in the fire hydrant, you technically get a ticket. But at least if you're in the hydrant, you let everyone else pass.
yeah.
Right. And traffic has gotten infinitely worse because of COVID, because now you have outdoor dining taking up parking spaces and people are not taking the train they used to. So like, do we need to add more to this problem? Like really?
And also with the rise of like those like e-scooters and electric bikes
Taking
now,
away parking spots
and
too.
sometimes they go in the opposite direction. And I'm like, yo, this is where people are gonna like get really hurt from this.
Right. That bugs me too, actually. Because I've seen like near collisions with, moms with strollers and dads with strollers because they're not looking the other direction.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like this is, this traffic situation in New York has gotten out of control. I'm not just saying that like to be just this New Yorker like griping. It's infinitely worse.
If you were that one jackass double parking, imagine that times 100. You just caused all this traffic.
Yeah.
Don't be that jackass, son.
Plus people have to swerve around you.
Yeah.
That's driving etiquette. That's what CeFaan's raving about. I mean, ranting about today. please.
Don't be that guy.
It was a pleasure having you on today. It really was.
Yes.
It's a bit of a dream, honestly, for us to be able to talk to you because we see you on TV so goddamn much.
Oh God, no.
So when you agreed to come on and when your PR department approved for you to come on as well?
Yeah.
I still couldn't believe it. I was like, no way. Until we saw you on the computer screen, I was like, I'm not going to believe it. Until I could hear his voice.
Yeah, well, I will say that the team listened to your content and they really enjoyed it. And they didn't just like Google you; they actually listened to the episodes. And
that's actually pretty hilarious.
They liked you. Yeah, they liked your content. So it was a thoughtful process. So you should know that. It wasn't just some blind green light.
Sometimes we get people come on and I'm like, did their agent really vent us or anything? If it makes you feel better, I think your episode is going to follow Miss America. So take that for however that, if that's good or bad, I don't know.
Exactly.
I don't know. One beautiful woman to one thirst trap reporter. I don't know. It's all good. If the internet does not know who you are and they want to stay up to date with everything that you're about, where can they follow you?
Everywhere. I mean, I have an occupational hazard. I have to be on all. I mean, look, I'm on. Look, I know no one's on Facebook anymore, but we have news viewership tends to skew a little older, so I'm on Facebook.
Yeah.
I'm on Instagram and Twitter. I will assure you that I'm too old for. I don't even know what TikTok and Snapchat is. I know it exists. I'm not on those platforms. Twitter, obviously, journalists are. That's a great platform for journalists. Instagram, Facebook, and otherwise Channel 7, and just shameless plug, we stream, the app streams live, free. We're also on Hulu. A lot of our content's on Hulu.
Yeah.
So you'll find us everywhere, even if you don't have a proper television, which a lot of young kids these days don't even know what that is.
They do not.
You can find me. Just Google me, I'm out there.
I guess one day if you see CeFaan on TikTok, he's probably been fired for being a Phillies fan.
Yep.
Yeah,
I think so.
He's done.
Yeah, that would be my midlife crisis.
My midlife crisis.
Right. Something went wrong. Something went very sideways on TikTok and Snapchat.
If you want to stay up to date with everything Ben and I are up to on the daily basis, check us out on all the social medias, even TikTok, unfortunately. We are at the handle Worst Asian Pod on every single one. You can find us at worstasianpod.com. If not, we will catch you guys next week. Same time, same place, every single week. Bye.
Love you guys. Peace.